Ennek a társadalomnak nincs joga addig az emberi méltóság sérelmeiért komoly súllyal panaszt tenni, amíg meg nem tanulja, hogy az emberi méltóság egy és oszthatatlan.
My name is Professor Andrew Ryder. I'm the Director for the Institute of Political and International Studies at Otvosloland University. I'm one of the organisers of this course, The Future of a Democratic and Just Hungary. My co-organiser is here with me, Professor Balázs, who's also at ELTE University, and both of us will be alternating the chairing of the roundtable series in this course. I think about 2/3 of the lectures, roundtables, are in Hungarian and 1/3 is English, and I will be doing the English ones. Basically, this roundtable series is to help inform, shape, and influence the public debate around Hungary's future, with an eye very much on the election in April 2026. And we're looking at a very wide range of topics: democracy, the rule of law, national identity, minority groups, the economy, youth. Basically, what we think and what the public seems to think are the big hot topics shaping the debate in the run-up to the election. Some people say this is the most important election in Hungary in the last 15 years. Some people say it's the most important election since 1990. Time will tell. As well as looking at some very kind of specific topics, we're looking also at things more broadly. We want to try and get rather philosophical. So we're looking at things like the politics of happiness, the concept of a good society. How can we make Hungary, and the world in fact, a better and perhaps a much more different place? So some what we call in English blue sky thinking. Are we in the business of reforming or transforming? That's one of the things I hope that will come up during the round table. We are also including people from a range of the political spectrum. People on the left, people on the centre, and people who are conservatives, because we want to see if it's possible to find a consensus. Sometimes in elections things can get very polarised. That's not always the best way to have discussions and debates about policy development. So we're going to be trying to see if there is an opportunity for some consensus. Other outputs will be blogs and articles, some articles for the academic journal Fundamentum, but a key outcome will be a book entitled The Future of Hungary for Palgrave Macmillan. So we hope this lecture series will have a legacy, and we hope it will have an impact in a very exciting time in Hungary's political history. This is the first roundtable. The focus today is on democracy, and we've got some, I think an incredibly exciting panel of speakers. We have Andrew Arató, Luca Kristóf, Zoltán Balázs, and Werner. Andrew Arató is Professor of Political and Social Theory at the Department of Sociology at the New School in New York. And he's been writing about Central Eastern Europe, since the 80s, if not earlier. And he's very well known for his writing on civil society and constitutionalism. And he was in Budapest last April, a conference ELTA organised, and it was a huge success. Students are still coming up to me saying how much they enjoyed meeting Andrew. So very pleased he's with us. Luca, Kristóf, is a senior research fellow at the ELTA Centre for Social Sciences. Her areas of specialism are elite studies, political sociology, cultural and sustainable consumption, and social stratification and integration. In 2021, she won the Polanyi Prize at the Hungarian Sociological Society. And I've heard of her, I've read her work, and I'm very pleased to meet her for the first time. Zoltán Balázs is a professor at the Corvinus University and chairman of the University Doctoral Council. He's also a research professor at the ELTA TK Political Science Institute and very relevant to the István Bibó Institute. In 2016, he was awarded the István Bibó Memorial Prize. And again, someone I've heard a lot about, I've read his work, and it's the first time we've met, and I'm very pleased to meet him. And finally, we have Werner Müller. Jan is the Roger William Strauss Professor of Social Sciences and Professor of Politics at Princeton University. And he works mainly in democratic theory and the history of modern political thought. And again, I'm a great fan of Jan's work, and it's a huge privilege to have him also today. So I think you agree, we've got an amazing panel, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Let's get the show on the road then with the first question. We have 4 pre-prepared questions, and I'm going to ask each participant to speak for no more than 3 or 4 minutes. So roughly for each question, we'll have approximately 15 minutes, 15 to 20. Then at the end, there will be an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. So, question number 1. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán famously stated in, I think it was 2014, that Hungary was an illiberal democracy. The question is, how was Viktor Orbán able to create an illiberal democracy? Let's start with Andrew first of all in New York. Jan, you might need to repeat the question if Andrew didn't hear me.
No, I heard it, yes.
Brilliant. Cool. Excellent. Over to you then, Andrew.
Okay, so 3 or 4 minutes, I'll keep it in the time element. We're talking about, I think, a 30-year process because though it would be tempting to blame it all on Mátyás Rákosi or János Kádár, I think it's best to take responsibility for the period in which we at least have been active, at least I, because I'm older than everybody here, but Jan is getting close to me also. So, hello, Jan. It's wonderful to see you, by the way. And I enjoy reading your work, even when we have not seen each other for a long time. So, how did it happen? If we start with 1989, I think it would be reasonable to start with the process through which liberal democracy has been introduced in Hungary. And I think all of you know that process, which was in a way directed to the famous Round Table and the political actors who were associated with it. So the question is, was that the problem in the first place, right? That would be one issue. For me, that would be an embarrassing conclusion because if you ask me about the question of što dělat, what to do now, I would think that Hungary needs another consensual, negotiated process, which is needed, even if the elections turn out favorably to today's opposition. But if that's the problem in the first place, then I think we need to re-examine the past. I would say, in addition to going back to that period, that the Hungarian process was in some ways exemplary, and it would be, I think, wrong to blame everything on the concessions originally made, and which did not resemble the Polish type concessions to the outgoing regime. So what if not then? If that's not what has gone wrong, then what else? What actually did go wrong? Let me just mention 4 areas of interest, which are indeed 4 areas of research. One would be the failure of the constituent process. I start with that not because it's the most important, but because that happens to be my academic area. I think it's clear that the original process, which as we see in Poland and South Africa, requires 2 stages completed. In Hungary, only 1 stage was completed, and left the political process too open for someone who comes along to subvert it. My second point, and I just mentioned it now without going into it, would be the role of civil society, on which I have written, in particular the implosion or the demobilization of the civil sphere, and the failure, and this would have been the function of a second stage process, to give the civil level a role in political governance and political participation. The third point I would point to would be the extent of economic impositions which characterize not just the Hungarian but other East European transitions too. The imposition of a harsh and ultimately problematic neoliberal model on a country which was not used to that kind of level of inequality which such a model would produce. And the fourth area I would mention would be the rise of populist actors. We kind of think of the current government, at least I do, as populism in power. But I think Hungarians here will know that ever since 1989, people like István and Mr. Tordján have introduced the possibility of such a politics into the Hungarian political framework. And I think that it is the other 3 steps I mentioned, the failure of the second stage, the demobilization of civil society, and the imposition of a neoliberal economic model is what ultimately made not Tordján's or Čurka's projects, because they died in any case, but their successors' projects viable and politically victorious. Thank you.
Sure. Luca is just indicating that she would like me let me to speak first. Well, I happen to agree with most things that Andrew Arató has just told us, but with some slightly different emphasis, and with perhaps a little bit more historically embedded understanding of what went wrong in 1989 and 90. If I just may just remember a personal memory of me was that in 1989 I was quite young, 23, 24, and I still remember the summer of 1989 and 1990, especially 1989 when the closed door negotiations took place between the elite, the communist elite, and the opposition. And I remember having that kind of feeling that, well, doors now closed, negotiations going on behind closed doors, and we myself, I was quite active in the streets, but just left out. It was my feeling, but I gather, and I'm quite sure that many people had the same feeling. Well, the main work has already been done. Our work is over. Now it's up to the elites to do the negotiations. So in the end result was a very nicely constructed or designed constitution with almost perfectly immaculate institutional system that the people had practically no adherence to. They were not loyal, not committed to in any way. Remember József Antal saying that perhaps you should have done a revolution, which was both cynical and both very true. So in the end, I think that the gravest mistake was kind of an alienation or a non-occurrence of this commitment or a bond between the elite, the institutions, and the people. But let me go a little bit deeper. I think that's not a unique phenomenon. There was not it didn't happen first in Hungary. Practically, this country has had a very long history of elites designing and construing institutions without the participation of society. For whatever reasons, and I'm not blaming anybody, but that's how it happened. And we are being taught, and we have been taught, and we are still being taught to be proud of our constant statehood, which is nice to have. Sometimes it leads one astray. Most probably it leads us astray because we think that because we have a continuous statehood going back to 1000 St. Stephen, we just think that that's how things are being done. There is a state, and there are the institutions, which does everything for us. Unlike Slovakia, unlike Romania, unlike Ukraine, unlike Poland, which did not have a continuous state, in some cases, to say the least. Still, they seem to be more vigorous socially than Hungarian society at crucial points of her history. So I don't think that 1990 was just a mistake. It was a mistake. I think that the constitution was to a certain extent. It was a misdesign, especially because the constitution was never resolved. How to legitimize the constitution, what ways the constitution should be confirmed. It was also a mistake not to. I don't want to go into the intricacies of the constitutional design. The prime ministers overpowering the 2/3 majority thing, all sorts of other things. But they are also seem to have been made mistakes or about. So, but I think that the deeper reason lies in this kind of a history of the people, of the society, never to be able to connect itself to its own institutions. I have a lot of other things to say, but maybe I should pass the microphone to Luca.
Thanks, and I was right to let you speak first because I can continue from right here. My thoughts about this elite failure or the failure of the consensus, that Orbán Viktor's agenda was to finish the so-called unfinished revolution after the decades that went since the regime changes, and this unfinished revolution is the alleged dominance of post-communist elites, and indeed it was not a unique narrative in Central Eastern Europe. So it happened in some other countries as well, with this emergence of populist forces. And why could he do this so easily? I would like to add some contribution from elite theory to the explanation of these illiberal processes or the democratic decline. One is that according to the elite theory, democracy can only be maintained, power only can be limited by the competition among elites. and also by maintaining a balance between the functionally different elite groups. And political competition was not very hard in 2010, because the political opponents, the socialist governments, already discredited themselves totally, most notably Ferenc Gyurcsány as a prime minister, so it was easy. And the other part about the different elite groups, like political, economic, and cultural elites, Orbán is said to be conscious since 2002, since his first electoral loss, that if he ever gets the power again, he should do something with economic and cultural elites, because he thought that he attributed his defeat to the economic and cultural elites. Therefore, right after 2010, he started this process of integrating, subordinating, and even capturing economic and cultural elites. I won't go into details about that, just want to remind you of the restructuring of economic ownership and power relations, the creation of the so-called national capitalist class, and also in the cultural sphere, the redistribution of cultural positions. About this, Andrew also wrote a lot, this so-called Kulturkampf. And the last point I would like to agree with Professor Arató about the crucial role of the civil organizations, because they are the mediators between the elite and society. And that's why they have a crucial role in stabilizing the political system, and Orbán was very good in this as well, to rechannel resources to the politically loyal NGOs.
Thank you. Jan, over to you.
Thank you. Allow me to make 3 points, which on one level also question the question a little bit. First point is empirical. Second one is conceptual, and the last one is more directly political. The empirical point. I think it's been a very convenient, very popular explanation, especially in Western Europe, to say that, well, there is an illiberal outcome because there was a clear demand for illiberalism. And this has sometimes led to the view that, these benighted Central and Eastern Europeans who never had time to understand democracy, of course, weren't multicultural enough, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the work of my former colleague, Larry Bartels, in a very important book called Democracy Erodes from the Top, it seems that empirically, there's very little that would point to such a deep-seated demand. That's not to deny the important differences in political cultures. The point is not that everything is the same. Of course, you can point to certain differences in values. But the idea that, everybody wanted this, and now that explains the outcome, seems not terribly plausible. Bartels also shows that after, to put it bluntly, of course, 15 years of propaganda, yes, you do have certain shifts in values. But again, it would be getting the causality wrong to say that, be it in Hungary or for the matter be it in Poland or other countries, people really necessarily wanted these outcomes. Second point is more conceptual, and it has to do with the very term, illiberal democracy. Liberalism and democracy are not the same thing. And unlike what some of my colleagues in political theory would say, I don't think that illiberal democracy is necessarily a contradiction in terms. If we're talking about certain illiberal values and policies, for instance, many real Christian Democrats, not fake Christian Democrats of the 21st century, would have said, yes, we are illiberal Democrats, and here are the reasons why that is the case. But what seems to me problematic is to reduce democracy to elections, to confuse democracy with popularity, and especially to divide up the conceptual world in such a way that democracy is just elections, and then everything else is rule of law or liberal values or something of that sort. If one is faced with politicians who systematically attack fundamental democratic rights, especially fundamental communicative democratic rights, just to mention the most obvious ones, free speech, free assembly, and so on, it seems to me a mistake to say that we should term these actors illiberal Democrats, because they're also attacking democracy. They're also attacking liberalism, but it's not just liberalism. And I think we ought to be clear about that conceptually, which leads me to the final, more political point. I think it was always very problematic that many elite actors in Europe and elsewhere basically let Orbán keep the word democracy. Yes, there's been, what many of our colleagues in the social science call a democratic recession since about 2005. Nevertheless, democracy as a term, as a value, remains, in a sense, the biggest prize of all. Everybody still wants to be seen as a democrat. And not just in Hungary and not just in Azerbaijan. You remember that, in 2021, when Biden had his big democracy summit, there was even a paper coming out of Beijing saying we also are Democrats. We have this thing called whole process democracy. Don't ask me what that is exactly. But everybody wants to claim the D word for themselves. So without necessity to give somebody the word democracy and basically acknowledge that they are still Democrats, I think is politically a clear mistake. And in the EU context, I think it also led to this unfortunate suggestion of a division of labor where the supranational level, does liberalism and the rule of law and so on. But of course, the nation state gets to keep democracy. And this then, very often sort of insinuated that, yes, it is still a democracy, somebody is very popular, but there's a bit of a problem with, the rule of law. And so the repair, crew arrives from Brussels, with Franz Timmermans or somebody else in the lead and fixes it. And of course, very often, also with, if you forgive me this polemical remark, very technocratic language, instruments, mechanisms, all these sort of typical EU speak. And I think it just reinforced a certain image that democracy was still okay, but there was a problem with liberalism. And liberalism could only be fixed from the outside. And I think politically, that was always a mistake. Now, I realize I didn't really answer your question, but I hope it was halfway interesting anyway.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, let's think about change. Let's think about a question about how we can reform or transform Hungarian democracy. The question is, how can trust and engagement in democratic institutions be strengthened? Let's start with someone here in person first of all this time. So,
well, maybe my answer will be very short because I don't know. It's a very, very, very difficult thing to strengthen trust and engagement in democratic institutions. What I can add is maybe to draw the attention to the fact that political polarization is very high in Hungary. I'm saying this because the level of trust in institutions is also affected by that fact, and this polarization is really high in international comparing, and it's not really an ideological polarization. Maybe it's not a new thing to say, or I'm not sure, but we have to differentiate it. It's not like Hungarians in ideological terms are very far from each other. It's called affective polarization, and I think it's even worse, if I may say it, because it means a kind of hatred between political parties, but is more between the voters, among voters, political camps, and it's political scientists are saying that this is a top-down phenomenon. So elite started. It started in the early 21st century within society, and it's even higher since 2010. So, for example, trust in democratic institutions is not the same among the Fidesz voters and the oppositional voters. It's a big gap, and not only in trust, but also as they perceive the state of the country, the economy, and things like that. So I think to strengthen the engagement, someone should try to reduce this level of polarization, but I really don't know how.
Well, that's
in less than 5 hours, please.
Yeah, that ought to be a question to the Hungarian participants. I think that at the present moment, very likely that is not the task that can be handled directly. So my impulse would be to organize a plausible political process which can be successful. So the first step, of course, is to win the election of next year. I think that is the first step, also for social changes that the growth of trust would imply. I mean, I suspect at this point the level of trust of the average Hungarian in the government is very low, and the opposition is not doing much better on that level. So it's actions that matter. And what are the kind of actions at this point relevant would be the nature of the campaign. So what I lack above all is a kind of clear formulation of why change the government, why replace the government, and what we would do if we actually managed to replace it. And, I read the Hungarian newspapers, which are unfortunately been quite destroyed in this process, but I don't see even a hint of an answer. And if you read the statements of the leaders of this new formation, the TISA grouping, you don't see much either, except that certain improvements for the weakest parts of the population will be pursued. But the question of why the current government should be replaced and what we would do if we actually manage to replace it is not answered. So I would say the first thing that and the Hungarian participants, it's their job, should be doing is answer the old question of what is to be done, and with relatively concrete terms. Thank you.
Great. Jan, if you could answer the question.
So let me again say something that probably comes across as a very pedantic conceptual point, and that certainly isn't a solution. But maybe it's worth remembering that trust is not like liberty or equality. It's not in and of itself a good thing. There's also a lot of trust, within a mafia state. And in many cases, it's a very good thing to have distrustful citizens. And for a long time, liberals would have said, actually, the whole point of a modern liberal democracy is also to institutionalize distrust. Now, trust, strictly understood, when we look at governments and institutions, is a matter of attributing competence and goodwill to an institution. Although philosophically, it's a tricky question whether an institution as such can really be trusted. But one thing that certainly helps people having such a relationship to an institution is to convince them that the way the institution is set up is such that there's a good chance that competence and goodwill are being assured. So if I may just use a provincial American example, if a president removes all inspectors general from the bureaucracy, so the people who are meant to keep an eye on corruption, citizens are entirely rational to basically decrease their trust in the institution. And conversely, if you put in such mechanisms, then it's perfectly rational to increase trust. So if you find ways, for instance, to have a process where a public prosecutor is installed in such a way and operates in such a way that people clearly are convinced that yes, this is impartial, that seems to me is still the best bet. An even more difficult question is the fact that liberal democracies don't just need this kind of vertical relationship of trust and distrust. I think they also need, in a certain way, a society-wide form of trust. And this goes to the point about polarization. We don't need consensus. I mean, democracy is not about consensus, it's about conflict. But we do need to have a certain faith that our fellow citizens, in a sense, want to go on together on the basis of a shared commitment to liberalism and democracy. And if they bring to power actors who basically violate these commitments, there are good reasons to distrust these citizens as well. And it's incredibly difficult, I think, to restore that more horizontal society-wide trust. I don't have any magic solutions to this, but I think we need to always think about both dimensions, and the different answers are not the answers are different with regard to these two dimensions, and they are not easy, but somewhat easier with regard to institutions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. First, let me just remind ourselves that Hungary is not the only country that struggles with extreme polarization. So America is in a similar shows, and if you just look at France, then that doesn't seem to be very promising at all in terms of how to bring together a society in such a way that a meaningful consensus might arise. But if you also recall how America was founded, how the federal constitution was designed, and how this new state emerged, which then went into a great crisis 80 years later. So we can just put some hope in the not necessarily in history or providence, but at least in the data that well, even a miserable state of polarization, poverty, whatever, it's still not a doom or a curse or something that you cannot overcome. Now, behind this, if I concentrate on Hungary, I think that the two things should be perhaps pointed out or highlighted. The first is that whatever we think of the opposition as a camp, or I don't know, as a party or a movement or whatever, it seems to be that that many Hungarians do go to the demonstrations, do go out and listen to this guy. In various countryside towns, something is happening in the countryside. Maybe I hate this word. Maybe you hate this word, and perhaps it's right to hate it. But still, things happen in the countryside that haven't happened for many years. So people going out to listen to one another and also to think together, and then bring about this kind of a grassroots groups. So I don't think that the whole situation is just spiraling out of control, and the polarization would never be would really just prevent any meaningful democracy to be established, or say, I don't very much like democracy, but it's a different story. The second point that I want to highlight is that much in agreement with what Jan said, it's not necessary that democracy is based on a singular consensus. I don't even think that it has to be based on some kind of a faith. Most probably and empirically and realistically, always the liberal, whatever, I don't even like the word liberal, maybe we should just use free and moderate government, is something that the necessity of which people can be convinced that it's necessary and a good thing to have a moderate and free government. Some people might believe in ideals like democracy, liberals, other people don't. But you can understand why it is important to have a moderate and reliable and free government, which then gives you, or at least allows you to live your own life. Suppose you are a loser, your party loses, but there is a promise that we won't harass you. There is a promise that the next time you might win, and you can just put up with this new system. So people just might find it. You don't have to convince people that it's a good thing that change occurs. You don't have to convince people that you are right. You only have to convince people that what you're going to do if you are in a government, it won't harm you. Okay, so that's the base. This is the lowest offer you can make, and I don't think that democracies really should or could go farther than that. Just provide for everybody a free and a moderate government and the way of living, which, if you want, you can call it a liberal democracy. I mean, the adjective liberal is so unpopular, right? That it's difficult to tell people that this is what liberal government really means. Forget the liberalism. You just should tell them that this is our government, which is not yours. This is our government, but we promise you that you can live with it, and that's all. That's the basic thing. But I think you can meaningfully and credibly make this promise. That's the art of politics. We don't know whether the opposition, suppose it comes to power, whether the opposition is ready to give signs to really do that, or is already giving signs to it. That's everybody's guess. But I don't think we should really just hope in the impossible.
Okay, thank you. We've started to think a bit more broadly now, and it might be worth us thinking about not just some of these developments in Hungary, but to consider whether they're global phenomena, and perhaps whether a solution is needed beyond Hungary to fix a number of problems. And if we're trying to answer the question, how can democracy be restored in Hungary, I'd like to broaden that by thinking about the global economic system we live in. Does that somehow need to be changed? So wider socio-economic change, what is the role of that in making restoring a democracy in Hungary, or making democracy work? But also, is there a need for a changing culture, some reorientation, some reinterpretation of identity in Hungary? Also, there are different types of democracy. Are we talking about a deliberative democracy, or should there be forms of direct democracy where civil society, for example, could also be used to form a bridge between parliaments and the wider population? And I'd be very interested to hear if anyone knows of where a country has managed to restore democracy and revitalise it. Is there a model somewhere else in the world that Hungary could look to and try and copy? And I had trouble thinking of an answer to that. So I'm trying to very much broaden out the discussion And when we've done that, perhaps we can start to ask the audience for some questions. So I think I should start with Jan this time. Jan, what's your answer?
So I'd be very reluctant to recommend any models for copying. I mean, this is how a lot of things were done in the 90s, and I think by now people would say it wasn't always such a great idea to hold up, one particular institution in a very different context and pretend that simply copying that was somehow going to, lead to consolidated democracies and so on. I think it is important first to ask about causes before one even sort of gets to any prescriptive language. As mentioned earlier, yes, I think it's very plausible to say that for about 20 years now, there has been a global democratic recession. It sometimes is tempting to say that precisely because it's a global development, there must be a sort of global macro cause. I mean, we often say about populists, they are the great simplifiers and, we understand the complexity of the world. But let's be honest, we would also love it if somebody could give us, the single factor, ideally in 280 characters, even better in 140 characters, that would simply say, it's the economy, stupid. Oh, no, it's all immigration or whatever. And again, I fear the pedantic thing one has to say is that, no, it simply isn't as simple as that. National differences do matter a great deal, and maybe less obviously, the fact that the outcomes are often similar. If you look around the world today, yes, there are obviously similarities, shared patterns in how, let's say, Erdogan governs, how Modi governs, how Orbán governs, how Kaczynski govern, and so on. The fact that there are similarities is not conclusive proof that there must be a single macro cause underlying everything. Because as we've also learned the hard way, many of these actors are learning from each other, and they're copying laws, they're copying political strategies. They've all learned how to be successful polarization entrepreneurs. So in that sense, I think we're not doing ourselves a favor if we now sort of pretend that there could be one size fits all model that simply one would have to copy. To make things worse, we've also learned, I think, that recoveries from authoritarianism since the mid-90s or so are not as comprehensive and as robust as one would like to hope. I think that's a very interesting question. I think many of you have more interesting things, especially Andrew, I think, has many more interesting things to say about this than I. But it seems like models of transitions from the 80s clearly do not simply apply today. And the quality of recoveries has also been declining. And you, of course, only have to look at Poland as an example of a moment where in 2023 everybody was ecstatic about the sort of moment of regaining democracy, and then you look at what has happened since and how incredibly difficult it has been to restore anything like in this case the rule of law. So in that sense, I think we should first get clear about all these challenges, have much more fine-grained understandings of different causes. And again, forgive me for being such a I guess it's always okay to be a pessimist in Hungary, but not to kind of sell you a TED talk like, just do civic, whatever assemblies, or just do one referendum and so on. I don't think we're doing ourselves a favor with this kind of prescriptive approach. Even just restoring a very conventional party democracy would be a huge step. Although, last point, Andrew, I also agree with something that you said at the very beginning. There's also something not quite right about a political language and a way of talking that purely is about restoring, and that is not about transforming. Because I think for good reasons, it tends to put a lot of people off because they say, look, don't just give me this inherently conservative story. There was something wrong with what we had previously. By the way, the same applies in the US. If you simply always said, we just want to restore the status quo, pre-2016 or pre-2024, and everything will be well, that is just not a story that I think people will buy, and they have good reasons not to buy that. Again, I'm afraid I completely failed to answer your question, but again, I hope it was at least halfway interesting.
Great, thank you. Zoltán.
All right. So, if I understood you well, I mean, you almost say what I was going to say. I don't think we should restore anything. So, it doesn't. I'm a conservative person, so when you should suppose that I'm just all in favor of restoring the past. That's not what conservatism means. We should just we should study the past to see what went wrong and how, and correct the mistakes. And I think that for this very reason, we shouldn't go back to a status, to the condition which caused the fall of democracy. So we have to find out something which, of course, should be based on in some ways our own past. Let me take an example. Think of Germany. Okay, when Germany lost the war in '45, it did not restore the pre-First War Germany, right? Even if it was more democratic than that time Hungary, for instance, universal suffrage, whatever. Okay, it was more democratic. But at the same time, the Second Empire, the Second Reich, was less and less federalist. And what they restored after '45, a new grounds, was federalism in Germany. That was something that they took from their own past and thought it was a good idea to stop to constrain the federal state as a unified. Germany should be kept as a federal state. It prevents certain things. Well, it gives you some guarantees to prevent some bad things to happen. But at the same time, of course, the new Germany, I'm talking about Western Germany, of course, was still a new democracy, adapting the age of the democratic standards of the age. I'm sorry. So Hungary, I mean, that's the best thing about politics. You're always free to act collectively, act in concert, right? As Hannah Arendt said, I'm also very much a fan of Arendt in that sense. So politics gives the freedom of action. So we have to, and we will have the chance. We always have a chance to do it differently, and I don't think restoration is the best term. We should look for good solutions, best solutions, learn from the past, preserve certain things, or even restore certain things, but not the regime, the system that already failed. So that's the basic point.
I understand, Andrew, that you would like to broaden the answer, but let me stay in Hungary, because on the global level I would only say very trivial things. But I thought about specifically Hungary in the context of the next year's elections, and let me get back to my first answer about competition and power balance. So. The competition part now seems to be okay, because we have the challenger, we have TISA party, as Zoli just said, that something is happening in the countryside. But of course, to win the elections is just the very first step in restoring or changing the mistakes of the past, as you wish. So the other thing would be to make the very a strong power centralization a bit more balanced, in terms of to give more autonomy to the economy, to culture, to civil society. And I personally think that it would be very important to give back the rights and resources of local governments, because centralization is a serious barrier of democracy in Hungary. And I agree that the next prime minister shouldn't necessarily be a liberal. Peter Magyar is not one, but if the next prime minister would not be that friendly with Putin, not fight with the European Union, and won't harm citizens who are thinking differently, for me it would be almost enough.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, some really interesting things have been said, and let me address them. Jan used the expression, not because he advocates it, but it's a possibility that a simple electoral transformation of the system is possible. And I think that given the kind of hybrids that exist in lots of our countries, and this is true for Poland as well as Hungary, the electoral road of defeating the current governmental project is open. It's possible. So one thing will be, one important step is to organize it, to fight it, to mobilize around it. And then comes the next problem. I'm leaving out the fact that a government which has such control over the media as the current Hungarian one may actually win an election even when it's supposed to lose it. Let's just, for the moment, imagine that cannot happen because of the popular support for the other side. But I think all the problems begin then because what a governmental structure, or let's even call it a regime like the one in power, tries to do, is to organize things in such a way that if an opposition comes to power, it won't be able to govern. I think that's the issue that you see in Poland, where already the presidential election indicates that the Tusk government is failing. And it has not reversed the judicial coup in Poland. It has not managed to transform the electoral system in such a way that the process becomes more open. And it seems to me that this is what is likely to be the future of a TISA government if it in fact comes to power. So I think people like us have the task of trying to figure out what is the way of allowing, or what is the way of avoiding that kind of outcome. I'm not an electoral expert, so I don't really know how to organize an election under these circumstances in the face of hostile media. But let's assume that that will happen anyway. But the next step is much more important. If Magyar and the TISA come to power, then we might be just facing an interlude, a period which is going to be a caesura or a kind of break, a temporary break between one Fidesz regime and the other. So I think that would be really important to think about, is how to do it, what to do then, and what to advocate then, what to try to organize. And again, I would say, and this might sound too traditional in terms of Central Europe, is that reliance on civil mobilization, even if we are in power, in other words, instead of demobilizing what's outside to try to remobilize society, that would be one. And the other, I think, I still think this is the lesson from the past, is to organize a consensual process in which the different sectors are drawn into making yet another Hungarian constitution, yet another Hungarian political regime, because the Fidesz one cannot be left in place. But what do you put back? Just to go back to what you had, which created the opening for the Fidesz legal transformation, or something else. So I think that I certainly agree that the regaining of trust, the reestablishment of social ties and solidarities, all that is important. But that has to happen from below. The most we can say is that political parties can be sympathetic to that or hostile to it, like Fidesz was. But something that political parties must do, and this goes for for not just TISA, but the Democratic Coalition, Mi Hazánk, and all the various parties, and including even the right, is organize a process of doing it differently, not imposition, but consensual, constitutional creation, which ought to lead to yet another, the third Hungarian constitution after the regime change, and I think that's the task. Populists are going to be present no matter what. And a way to defeat them in a system which is not able to use the old repressive methods of communist regimes is to do better, to answer social needs better. And the first one would be to organize a different political process. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that. You made me think of some writing I did on Brexit Britain. A few years ago, I was writing quite a lot about Brexit in the UK and thinking, well, how could we sort of repair the polarisation that now existed in Britain, stop this kind of hate politics and hating your opponent, but also get people to think about deeper issues, which were the cause of Brexit, how we run the economy, and ultimately the relationship with Europe and possibly rejoining. And one of the things I and others were writing and talking about was the use of deliberative assemblies, which could be organised at a regional or even more local level, where you try and get a range of stakeholders together, there's a mediator, and there is a deliberative conversation over an extended period where at the local or regional level you try and find some consensus or agreement between a wide range of people. And possibly that might be something that could, as you say, Andrew, try and progress things in a new way that isn't top-down, that involves civil society and people from the bottom up. And I think this would be one idea that we will return to in the Roundtable series. What I want to do now is basically just give the audience a chance for some questions. And then I'm going to give our speakers at the end a chance to sum up, because I always leave these events thinking, oh God, I wish I'd said this. So you've got a chance, our four guest speakers, to, if you think you missed anything important or we didn't talk about anything important, you've got a chance at the end. But I'll take a few questions from the audience.
My name is Julius Rostas, and I want to ask the panel, especially that Jan is leaving soon, remobilizing the citizenry, along what kind of issues can that happen? And going back a little bit to history, the fascist movements in the interwar period very much promoted the anti-corruption fight in order to mobilize the society as part of their political struggle. So can social justice be the basis of remobilizing the political constituencies? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So if there is corruption, if you are facing a mafia state, then in principle, it's a good idea to mobilize around corruption. It's obviously not a panacea, as we've seen in many contexts. But I don't think there's some sort of magic solution. If only you pick this one topic, it is bound to work out. I think the more difficult question and challenge is how do you mobilize around issues such that you honor the fact that, again, democracy is not about consensus. It allows us to process conflicts in a peaceful way, such that, as Zoltán also said, losers can live with the outcome. And that can sound very trivial, almost, civics textbook. But if you think about what populists and right-wing populists in particular actually do, of course, they don't fight conflicts in this way. So observing the kind of boundaries of how conflicts should be structured, not basically demonizing your enemy, not declaring demonizing your adversary, not declaring your adversary to be an enemy of the people. As naive as it might sound, sticking to something that can be recognized as certain factual boundaries of how certain conflicts are described, I think that's something that would already be a massive step forward. One other related issue, if I may. one often hears today that, oh, we have it so much more difficult because in the old days, there were mainly conflicts around material issues. And unfortunately, we have to deal with questions of identity politics, and people don't compromise around their identities. And, the left started, but now the right is doing it, and so on. It's not completely false, but in many ways, it's very misleading because many conflicts which today are remembered as supposedly purely material, of course, also did have, if you like, a cultural dimension. To say that, workers' movement was simply about higher wages or better working conditions just is a falsification of history. And furthermore, the idea that in the old days, basically people were always so ready to make concessions on material questions is, again, I think, deeply misleading. I mean, ask any 20th century historian, they would not say that, yes, of course, the wealthy were always willing to kind of, concede in the interest of sort of keeping the polity together. There may have been a sort of golden age to some degree in the 50s and 60s in Western Europe, but even that is on one level misleading because conflicts, also left out a lot of issues. And if you think back, to how a couple of years ago we were all discussing Colin Crouch's diagnosis of post-democracy, which, in some versions came with the suggestion of there was this golden age of real democracy. If you asked women, would you really want to time travel back to the 1950s and say that was actually real democracy and things were great? I think the answer is pretty clear. So in that sense, again, I'm not giving you a direct answer in terms of just do this and then democracy will follow. But I hope, again, that these are somewhat useful reflections on a bit of a meta level.
Okay. I don't know if any of the other speakers want to respond to Julius's question. If anyone else has got an answer. Yeah, Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Hungarian, but I lived abroad for 70 years, so it's hard for me to know what will move the Hungarian activist and the Hungarian voter. But to me, corruption sounds okay. I mean, it sounds plausible. I suspect that the sociological surveys show that the average Hungarian thinks the current system is incredibly corrupt. And the friends, those who are close to the government in various ways, have enriched themselves at the expense of everybody else. The inequalities are great. I think inequality should be added to corruption because it's not just a question of reducing the wealth of those who stole, but also to somehow increase. I think in this sense, I see some signs of this in the TISA program. In other words, to actually address the victims, address the ones who are the losers of the process. And I think that is certainly something that should be done together with the anti-corruption campaign. My one fear is, and I end with this, is that I know Hungarians pretty well after all these years. And to me, and maybe this is very different now than it was in my day, but to me, a Hungarian to whom you denounce corruption and say that you should throw the bastards out, the natural question the Hungarian voter will think, what guarantees that you will not be as bad? That's what my father used to always say. You will not be as bad, as corrupt. You will not do the same things. Trust. I think you were right to raise the issue of trust before. People are distrustful. They don't trust those who denounce. And so I think that somehow one needs a formula. And maybe I'm too old-fashioned, but I think a formula which brings together, somebody used that expression, all the relevant stakeholders in a consensual process of generating a new thing, at least would have the virtue of saying that we don't want to step into the place of the old corrupt rulers. We want to establish a kind of new process by which no one can become what they have become. Anyway, maybe that is too political and too formal as a proposal. So I agree with the questioner. Corruption should be an important theme. I am sure it is for TISA. I mean, they must be talking about it all the time. But not just corruption, but also the enrichment of those who are clients, clientelism, and the costs of clientelism for the rest of the population. That is, I think, a pretty good theme.
Okay, just waiting for the next question. Briefly, let me say something very briefly. Yes, so you can pick certain favorite topics. I think that corruption as such really bothers a lot of people. I wouldn't say that it's just an elite issue. It's more than that. But perhaps you should, and we must formulate it in a variety of ways. I mean by this, I mean that corruption doesn't just cause inequality or unjust enrichment or whatever. It also causes dependence, right? And people wouldn't necessarily understand the reason why they feel worse because they are somehow exposed to all sorts of to other people's favors and graces or whatever. Okay, so as far as I understand, people feel uncomfortable today. Many people are uncomfortable today because they think that their autonomy, their freedom has been reduced. It don't necessarily see the cause of that, but they complain, and we have to. I mean, every democratic politician has to address this uneasiness, whatever, these problems, these pains that they feel. It's also true for sometimes in Budapest and big cities we don't necessarily understand that people fear of a change, right? They are accustomed to whatever they are accustomed to, and it's also a business of politicians in a democracy to assure people that your future is not endangered by a new kind of power. So a lot of things that have to be addressed, not just corruption, injustice, inequality, but also fears of so many kinds of fears that sociologists know very well. Fear of losing your health, children. Okay, so that's. I don't think. It's Hungary. It stands out for this very unique thing that the abuses of children was really the trigger of this new movement, and it's still on the agenda. This is one of the most vulnerable sides of this current government, that can be shown to be indifferent to or even harming children in a positive way. But that's a very interesting phenomenon today. Where it leads to. Does it lead to a society in which children are somehow being treated in a better way, more systematically? Does it change our attitudes towards our institutions? How can we build institutions in which we can entrust our children, schools, or other services? There's always so beautiful questions in one sense. Okay, politically beautiful questions.
So, Luca, you said that. Centralization is a big barrier to democracy, and I want to ask, how does this work exactly? Like, couldn't it be a golden mean for democracy, because both the left and right-wing people could get what they want in some kind of ways, and also centralization is never something that could be permanent, in my opinion.
Before the Fidesz governments, power centralization was considerably less, because local governments has much more rights, schools, hospitals, taxes, public works, everything. And when it's not like that, everything goes a chain of dependency, a hierarchy of dependency and clientelism that someone just mentioned, clientelism. And also there's this thing called elite capture, when elites use resources to their own good instead of the people, and it's very frequent right now among local elites. So I'm not sure what was your question already. I'm sorry. That's what I meant, that the centralization of power should be reduced.
I really appreciated the talk, how you discussed how illiberal democracy can be challenged. I do feel there was a lot of emphasis on top-down approach, even though you mentioned bottom-up as well. And I think you, Andrew, mentioned that civil society should be forming a bridge between the government and the wider population. And because I'm not a political scientist by any means, but I became curious if we challenge this idea of maybe civil society not only acting as a bridge, but more like become an advocate or a driving force. So we change it, and then how would that look to like challenging or changing this institutionalization of the democracy? And then second thing I wanted to ask, Zoltán, you mentioned in West Germany after 45, they decided to adopt new democracies instead of restoring anything before. And I was wondering, did they have any other choice? And even so, they kept rehiring former Nazis in their institutions. And then, if this is a good example, maybe, then would you say that this is where Hungary lost its chance with the percentage agreement? And then, if we would have fallen into a different side, then we could have ended up in a better position? Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to just give a brief answer to the civil society question, and I'll hand it over to Zoltán and the others. Yeah, basically one job I had many years ago was in the British Parliament. I was a researcher to an all-party parliamentary group on gypsies, Roma and travellers, and basically the politicians from all the main parties came together in special interest groups on China, trade, you name it. But they said, well, we helped them set up a group on one of the most marginalised minorities in Britain, gypsies, Roma and travellers. And it was really successful because we brought members from these ethnic minority groups into Parliament to talk about their concerns and grievances, and it was very educative for the parliamentarians. They learned more about the problems and they were able to develop policy responses. And I saw some really amazing things. Women who were semi-literate suddenly become more interested in reading and writing. Two went on to do PhDs, in fact. And I saw the transformative potential of having dialogue and empowering people in a very elite institution like the British Parliament. So I think it can be done. I feel quite optimistic about these kind of bridge building exercises, and I'm surprised parliaments don't try and do more outreach work. But I'll hand it over to Zoltán.
Yeah, I'll try to be very, very quick. The question concerning Germany was, I think, the quick answer to that question is that, well, of course, they kept a lot of Nazis. I mean, West Germany, the East Germany was even worse in many respects, but they mostly died, okay? But in a peaceful way, perhaps. But the German democracy survived, didn't it? So the very simple answer is that, well, even if you have a number of people, even in today Germany, many people have nostalgia, and growing nostalgia for the Third Reich, they still don't seem to be threatening the German, whatever we call German democracy. So I don't think that the argument really refutes what I said. The second thing is what I wanted to reflect on briefly is this kind of a civil society thing, because this might be something which I have something different in mind. So if you remember your studies from the history of political thinking and political history, When John Locke introduced the concept of civil society, then he used it as a synonym for what we today would call a political society. And the crucial thing is to create a political society rather than a civil society. Civil means a political society is in which citizens participate, okay? As citizens, not as private persons pursuing a common cause of whatever kind and whatever noble kind of that is. So political society, I think, is a prerequisite to say, democratic institution or institutional system. The political society is what Hannah Arendt had in mind when she wrote about this, when she praised the Hungarian Revolution in '56. I don't want to go into details, but she had a very clear idea what it means, and I think that that's what we did not have in 1998 and 1990, and other that the polls had, I think. And the big question for me is whether or not we are in the formation, whether we are currently somehow getting closer to that kind of a political society without which even a civil society cannot really exist, or just on the fringes of an autocracy, because autocracy is also a certain type of civil society to linger on. But I don't want to dwell on this any longer. So I don't put much hopes in civil society as being a substitute for a political society. We could begin a long political theoretical discussion. I just wanted to raise the issue, and thank you for your question.
Thank you. Let's move to the sum up now from the speakers. So if they feel there's anything that we've not talked about or they didn't mention that was particularly important, now is their chance. So Jan, could we come to you first? Oh, okay. Andrew, are you still there?
So
cool.
Okay.
No, stay.
Well, it's hard for me because I'm Hungarian, but I don't live there. And I can't act on the basis of, I can't act on the things that I'm going to say. But one thing, I'm not in love with Tisza or with Péter Magyar or with some of the other leaders whose name I've seen. But I think task number one is to help them win. Task number one is to help them win, because you need a new terrain, and that new terrain cannot even begin to open up unless there's an electoral defeat. So I would say one task is that. But I think that given what I just said, it's important not to think that the struggle is over with one electoral defeat of Orbán, right? I think that that's when actually the real process begins. And much has to be done. Somebody said not civil society, but political society. I agree with that. Political society must be reconstructed. That means that the political parties that exist, the proto-parties, must become real, must become better organized. But civil society remains important. And I don't think Hungary is a dead society today. I think you see a lot of potential mobilization, usually in response to governmental acts which are hostile or which are repressive. But you see mobilization, you see, especially on the part of the young, as always. So you see the possibility of reconstructing civil society and building on it. And I would say that, a new economic formula is needed. That means a discussion of the state-market relationship. That means the discussion of the ownership relationship. That means the discussion of centralization and decentralization in the economy. I think that it will be important to reconstruct the economy too. So political society, civil society, the economy, and I would say the state, because most likely the consequences of corruption in the last 25 years are most marked in the state sphere. So a anti-corruption campaign must also mean reform of the state.
Okay, so very briefly to this question. Yes, I agree with Professor Arató that the one important thing is to help the opposition to gain the election, but also the second one is don't forget that we can do things in our private life as well. I mean, in the small circles around us. Okay, don't say civil society, but let's say civil activities, and especially cross-cutting civil activities, like cross-cutting the political cleavages, political lines. For example, if we are a member of a church, don't let different try to foster a dialogue and different voices to be heard. And same if we are in a green movement or something like that. So I think it's also important little thing.
Yeah, as a last final word, may I just perhaps repeat myself when I point out that it's not just Hungary that's at stake. It's a larger word that's also at stake, and I think all of us and all of you and everybody who's listening to us today knows that very well, that whatever happens in France, in Italy, or in Sweden, or I don't know, whatever, is also relevant in Hungary, and not just for geopolitical reasons, but also the ways that they and us somehow trying to find out what it means to live in a democracy and what it means to form, as I said, a political society. A very, very simple example, and by that note I finish. We are witnessing a fundamental change of how parties work, right? For many, many decades, political society was just replaced by parties, seems to me at least. The party politics is just what politics is how politics is being done. This age seems to be more and more over today. And new types of movements seem to emerge, and new types of parties seem to emerge. The TISA is a very different party that the old Hungarian parties were, right? And we could cite a number of other things in the world of the internet. And our transactions, our relations are also undergoing fundamental changes. So I think that's a very, very interesting new phenomenon, and Hungary is part of this, much as the Netherlands is part of it, as England is part of it, or America is part of it. Don't forget, Hungarian government has very good connections to the current American government. They are learning from each other, very interestingly, right? So just this is a footnote here, but I think that we should prepare ourselves not just for a Hungarian whatever transition, but a bigger one as well. Thank you.
Well, I think we've had a really good start to this roundtable series, which will go through right up to next May. So as we get nearer the election, I'm sure some of the discussion is going to become more intense, and we'll be talking about the aftermath of the election. But I found it incredibly stimulating. There's so many ideas racing around in my head now. And I think this is a good sign if the following seminars are as stimulating and as provocative as this one. I mean, I think we should thank very much our excellent panel of speakers for doing a great job. Thank you very much.